These front springs also cleaned up very well in the vinegar bath, and I've given them a few coats of epoxy black. They're fine to go back on the car. The bottom arms, once again, cleaned up well. The paint makes them look better, and they're all in good condition and ready to be reassembled. The main suspension arms, I rebushed those. That wasn't too hard, and the old bush is pressed out just using the services of the press there, and using a socket to push them in and out. So they're fine. They've all been done. There's the other one there. So they're just ready to store away until I'm finished cleaning up the chassis, and then I'll start to put them all back on. At this stage, that's a few more pieces that have been cleaned up and ready for reassembly. Part of replacing the kingpin set up in the front suspension is the removal of the bushes inside there. I suppose you can try and use a socket of the right size to try and push it out, but what I've done is to add a bit of scrap that I've got here, as I've turned up something the right size, something that will actually go through the hole once the bush is removed. So that face there is machined down so that is the right size, and also machine it down so it goes inside the bush. So when that goes in, that should sit neatly around the edge of the bush. Now I'll just put that in through there, just do the bottom one. The problem you have, of course, is making sure that it goes out and goes out straight. This piece is meant to assist with that. Does it come out easy? No, not necessarily. This is a 20-ton press, and you would think that it wouldn't take much to knock these out, whereas in fact it does. Nothing ever works the way you want it. Now, it's only held in by friction, and I'll start applying pressure. I probably should support under that, but I won't for the moment. Applying more pressure. There it goes. Now sometimes it will go with an enormous snap. That didn't, that came out nicely. So once it's broken the friction, the initial friction to move it, it comes out quite easily. As I say, it probably could use a socket, although it's better if you've got something machined of the right size so it comes out without catching and without getting your socket jammed. As you can see, the piece fits through the bore without jamming in the bore. Hasn't scored there, so that's fine. That came out nicely. So there's the bush. I'll reverse this and do the other one, and then I'll get ready to try and put the other bushes back in. Now to do that, it's the reverse of what I've just done. once again, easier said than done. Getting the initial press into the hole is the hardest bit, and getting it to go square with the hole is also difficult. You'll also find when you press the new bushes in, the internal diameter of the bush will shrink as it's squashed in place. Hopefully I've machined enough off the inside here so that won't actually jam inside the new bush, but I'll see as I start to press that in. The time it takes to turn up the tool to press the bearings out certainly pays for itself in the long run, because you use that to press the new ones back in. I've decided the bottom one I'm pushing in from the inside. The reason for that is because of the thread, and I want to be able to push it in so I can see what's happening. It's going in quite easily, which is what I'd expect it to do. So I'll just take it down to so it's flush with the housing there. And then I'll reverse that and then do the top. So that's quite easy to put back in. I'm about to ream the kingpin bushes. Now, the way you would normally do it, so I'm told, or the way they used to do it, was to clamp the stub axle in the vise, use an adjustable ream with a pilot which would go through and fit into the bottom to centralise it, and then hand ream it, basically scrape at a time until you could just fit the kingpin through, and then start at the other end and do the same thing. I don't have a pilot with my reams. You can get them, they're a little bit hard to get nowadays, but I thought I'd try it another way. I mean, I have a small lathe, so what I've done is to mount it between centres in the lathe, put the ream in the chuck, and it's got a live centre in the other end of the bush. That should centralise it. Well, that's the theory. And then I've just adjusted the ream out so it's barely touching, and then what I'll do is, by holding this up, turn the, it's just starting to take up, just turn the ream like that, and then I've gradually got to push this in. Oh, if I unlock that, it'll work. Just make sure that's pushing on as I cut the bush. So that's the theory. That's what I intend to do. So, I mean, I won't show doing it because what I've got to do is gradually push it in as I'm turning this, and basically the camera's in the way. So I'll see how it goes. It will take a while because once I've done one run of the ream, I've got to actually take it out and then see how the fit is. But that's the principle. I'm hoping it will work. Now, what I've been doing with this is reaming it out between centres. I've done the top and I reamed that out so I got the clearance required to insert the pin. I've been working on the bottom one, and just by very fine increments. I mean, you don't go in and do one big cut. It's a series of small cuts just to make sure that you don't damage the bush, and also you don't ream it too large. This pin with the last test fit was able to push in just a little bit tight on the bottom end. Now I've just adjusted the reamer marginally, and just to clean up the bush on the bottom. So I'm hoping on the next trial fit, when I get this out, which is easier said than done, you can see how I've got it set up. I've just got a plate here so it slides along. And what I do, I'll just show you there, is that I hold it back against the live centre while I turn the ream, and then I progress the whole unit by turning the tailstock and the headstock, and then ream again like that. And I progressively do that all the way through. Getting it off, it's still a reasonably tight fit on the ream, so I've actually got to back that off bit by bit. So it's not really cutting, it's just enabling it to slide along the ream without damaging the bush. When I get it back far enough, it will slide off. Still not quite back far enough. That should be enough now. No, not quite. Camera's in the way there, I really can't grab hold of it properly to pull it back. Okay. Remove the tailstock. Okay. Comes off. Just clean that up a little bit. A little bit of lubrication, WD-40. And this will go in. Still a little bit tight at the bottom. I'll have to judge whether that's too tight, but it's reamed. Maybe a shave more on the bottom. I'll just I'll do the other one and come back to this, but that's how you can ream it in a lathe. So whether that's the way you're meant to do it, but it's certainly the way I'm able to do it, because I don't have a pilot to go on the end of the hand reamer. Otherwise I'd be sticking a pilot on that, mounting this in the vise, and then coming down and doing it by hand. So I don't know which is the better way. Anyway, that seems to work. And what I'm doing is adjusting the kingpin buttons, the buttons that go in the cap. Already fitted the kingpin, that's in place with the cotter pin. Now, without the button in, screw that on to make sure that the flange of this nut actually touches the housing there. In my case it doesn't when it's fully tightened. There's actually an 11th hour gap. So you need to know if there is a gap there. Then what you do is put a button in, tighten it down, and see what the gap is again with a feeler gauge. And that'll give you an indication of how much you've got to reduce the size of the cap button. Now, added to that, you actually have to add the clearance you need between the cap button and the kingpin button there, which is 2 thou. Now, to cut down the process, what I did is that I didn't use the new pin. That's the new pin there, quite long. The reason I didn't do that is that the measurement I had it worked out was that it was only going to be about half the length of that. Now this is a hardened pin. To reduce the length of that would have been, I guess, a little bit difficult, seeing it's hardened. So what I did was use an old pin, an old button, sorry. This is the one I've used, and by positioning it in this fancy tool I made up, just pushing it in the hole, I was able to use this to put on the linisher. Now I put it on the linisher first to make sure it was flat, started the linisher and then gradually moved it around to make sure I wasn't grinding uneven. Didn't leave it there too long, came back, measured it up, put it on the oil stain here and rubbed it backwards and forwards to remove any imperfections. So it's taken about an hour, or a little bit more than an hour, to reduce even this worn button to the size I want. Now it's actually not quite the size, it's 1 thou too long at the moment, and I'll persist now without the linisher just by rubbing this backwards and forwards, and that it's going to take quite a while, but I just don't want to take too much off. So that's how I've done it, by using old buttons. Now in the case of mine, they're only worn on one side. On the back end here it's quite flat, just like a new button, but I started by flattening this worn side, and the reason for that is it was a lot easier because of the dip. You're only sort of grinding down the rim until you get to the bottom of the cup that's worn there. So it just made it a little bit quicker to grind them down. Now when I fit them up, I'll put this, when I've got the right size, and I know the size because I'll put the measurement on a piece of paper there, I'll put the button in the cap, and go over here, screw that down as tight as it will go because it won't then be pushing on the button. There should be a 2 thou gap, and then I'll nip this bolt that I've re-tapped, stainless steel bolt, to hold this in place. So it's taken a while to do these, but they've come up quite well. I don't think I'll have to do them again. Nice new parts, they should last certainly my lifetime. So I'll finish this one off and then I'll start the other one, and then I'll start to reassemble the rest of the suspension onto this. Finally finished the kingpin button. Took a while to actually remove the thickness of the button I was using, and finally I've got, hopefully, the right amount of play in there, which is 2 thou if I've measured it correctly. It's all nipped up tight. I've put the lock bolt through, so that should stop the cap from coming undone. Spherical bearing, I've actually had one that actually hopefully I've got 2 that are still serviceable. Cleaned them up, and I've fitted that, adjusted the shims to make sure that there's enough movement between the bearing and the brass cap certainly without flopping around. So it's got to be able to move, because the grease has got to go between the spherical ball and the brass cups. So that's done. Now I'll keep assembling this. I've got to put the backing plate on next. Got that here. Then sorting through all the bolts to make sure I've got the correct bolts to bolt all this together. I've got to put the grease nipple and cap on the top of the kingpin there. I haven't done that yet, but that's not hard. And then I don't have the hydraulic brake repaired at this stage, but I can put the bottom adjuster on, so I'll get that all assembled so this is as complete as it can be, with a view to then putting this on the vehicle itself. I'll bolt it onto the arm, and also put this onto the transverse link at the front. Hopefully I can then assemble the spring, but whether I do that straight away or whether I do the other side, I might do the other side first so they're both done, and then I can work on how to compress those front springs without the weight of the engine in the car. So at this stage it's coming along quite well. As I say, the spherical bearings were actually serviceable, which is surprising. Out of all the ones I have, I've only got one set that are serviceable. They're all in terrible condition. So at this stage I'll keep going and finish the assembly.